Christmas.
Okay, it's Christmas Eve, I need a shave, and I've seen The Matrix Resurrections, so let's try and do this quick. Because I fancy a drink. Oh, and full spoilers, it's Christmas, so I'm not messing about with a non-spoiler review.
To be going back to where it all started. Back to the Matrix.
In the past week, everyone's been freaking out about Spider-Man No Way Home, but in the middle of watching The Matrix Resurrections, there's a moment where Neil Patrick Harris's analyst says that we crave the comfort of certainty.
They don't want freedom or empowerment. They want to be controlled. They crave the comfort of certainty.
And when he said that, I couldn't stop thinking about the reception to No Way Home and the way in which we all knew, really, that Tugboat and Garfield were going to be in the movie. We did know. It got leaked everywhere, but Sony held off on actually showing it to create this false sense that we were going to be given a surprise. And really, it was no surprise at all. We got exactly what we wanted. We got the comfort of certainty.
Nothing comforts anxiety like a little nostalgia.
This movie is a massive middle finger to all of that. It's a middle finger to all of your expectations for the movie. It's a middle finger to that J.J. Abrams style of franchise movie making that panders at every turn.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
And leaves no room for any kind of criticism on the movie or any kind of interesting, engaging discourse, because ultimately, those kind of movies have nothing to say. I'm so glad that Lana Wachowski came back to The Matrix and made it in the way that she did, because I think it's so perfect to make a movie that is not only a true Matrix 4, but also a reboot of the original Matrix, and then on top of that is a critique of the entire Matrix trilogy. I was really convinced that Jonathan Groff was going to be playing Neo's agent, and that he was going to be a movie star in this new Matrix, kind of like what Cypher wanted in the first movie.
Someone important. Like an actor.
But it makes so much more sense for him to be the head of a game studio, and for the Matrix trilogy to be a series of popular games rather than a series of popular movies. Just further driving home the point that today's youth do not give a shit about cinema, and that it is dead, and that if anything was going to take the world by storm and be something that everyone's talking about right now that's not a superhero movie, it would be a hit video game series. And I love the contrast from the 90s workplace, which was sterile and much more obviously a prison. This new workplace is reworked and reworked, and everyone's really happy to be there, and it's adorned in lovely bright colours. Much like real workplaces and WeWorks of that nature, they've become much more palatable, much more easy on the eyes, to trick you into thinking that you're enjoying being at work. It felt so current. It was a reflection of the world we live in today. It was a Matrix for 2021. But it did it under this lens of this mugging meta parody. I'm not going to lie, judging from the initial reviews, I was a bit worried about how meta it was going to go. I thought there was potential that it was going to get meta to the point that the previous movies wouldn't make sense. But now, having seen the movie, I think they played the meta angle perfectly. It makes sense that the Matrix trilogy would be an important story to the inhabitants of the real world, both human and machine. It makes sense that it would be a story that the analyst could use to create that middle ground between wanting something you can't have and getting unhappy about it, that hope and despair to drive this new Matrix. And in spite of Neil Patrick Harris having very few scenes, I thought all the scenes he was used in were spectacular. I love the idea that this new Matrix is built around feelings rather than facts, and that all the analyst needs to do to keep everyone controlled is incite rage and anger and corrupt facts based on the way that people feel about them. That, coupled with that aforementioned middle finger to franchise movie making in 2021, where we are swamped with the idea that this pandemic killing millions of people is fake and completely orchestrated by the rich, even though they would have no benefit to doing such a thing, just makes this movie feel all the more apt.
Here's the thing about feelings. They're so much easier to control than facts.
And I think there's something even more poignant about that, in the sense that we have spent the last 2 years locked away in our rooms, in our pods, and so many of us came out of those pods to go to the cinema to get that comfort of certainty last week, to get Tugboat, who we've not seen in like 14 years, to get Garfield, who we've not seen in 7, all of those villains, to just, to get that comfort of nostalgia back into our lives when everything else is going down the drain at such a rapid rate. As a resident of the UK, at a time where our free healthcare is on its knees and it is in danger of being completely crippled, it's maddening to see so many people come out and defend Spider-Man No Way Home, not as a movie, but as if they're part of a football team. People talk about the movie as if they are supporters of it. It's as if they need to defend the honour of the movie, and that by you saying you didn't like, not even the entire movie, just disliking certain aspects of it, that it makes you against them. It's created this weird divide of us or them. You either love the latest superhero movie that came out, or there's something wrong with you. And that's maddening, because it's stifling the most interesting parts of film criticism. The discourse, the debates, the disagreements. And I feel like The Matrix Resurrections has dropped in a week later to say that.
Matrix means mayhem.
Because it's not going to be what everyone wanted. It's not exactly what I wanted. I'm going to get into that in a minute. But it is a movie that was made by a seasoned director with something to say that captures, I think, a lot of the trials and tribulations that we're going through right now in a poignant way. It's a movie that's fully aware of the fact that the first film in the saga is sometimes condensed down to simply mayhem and bullets and bullet time.
Bullet time! Bullet time!
And it knows that a lot of people just want to see that for 2 hours straight and not continue the story of The Matrix in any meaningful way.
This cannot be another reboot, retread, regurgitate.
Why not? Reboot sell.
I really liked the focus on Neo. It really feels like it's a true fourth movie in that sense, because it's not off trying to set up a bunch of new characters or pass the torch or anything like that. This is the definitive next chapter in Neo's story.
Resurrecting you both was crazy expensive. Like renovating a house. Took twice as long, cost twice as much.
And it's perhaps the most vulnerable and emotionally tortured Neo we've ever gotten. I particularly loved the cut from the Deus Machina shootout to him being in a therapy session with the analyst, because the way it cuts back and forth, like, even though you know that he is in the Matrix and you're waiting for him to get out, you fully buy why he doesn't know what to believe. Because the idea that the game that he created is actually starring himself and the woman that he created is real and is just out of reach is insane. And the analyst has created such a perfect environment to keep him going insane again and again and again on a treadmill.
The treadmill.
Before I go into more detail on The Matrix Resurrections, I want to quickly talk about today's sponsor, Established Titles. With The King's Man about to release in theatres, it got me thinking about why the circumstances of one's birth shouldn't prevent you from being a gentleman. So if you feel like getting the official title of Lord or Lady, or you think someone you know could really benefit from the ego boost, then Established Titles is the perfect last minute gift idea for you.
I'm a Time Lord. You're a big fish.
By purchasing 1 square foot of dedicated land in Scotland, you can call yourself a lord or lady based on this historic tradition. You get a certificate proving your title as well as a unique plot number with which you can see the exact location of your land. You can then add your incredibly prestigious official title to your credit card and other official documents. In return, Established Titles will plant a tree with every order and help protect the pristine woodlands of Scotland, and support global charities such as One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future. So if you want to become a lord,
a Sith Lord,
or give it away as a gift because you're really generous with titles for some reason, go to establishedtitles.com/fullfat and get an extra 10% off on top of their holiday sale. Thanks Established Titles for today's sponsor. Please only refer to me as Lord Full Fat forevermore. Can you tell that I had a Kingsman video lined up for this sponsor? Hopefully I can still get that video out before the movie, but Matrix is matrixing things difficult. I love the idea that the analyst creates situations where Neo and Trinity could almost find each other but are just out of reach. The idea that the best way to make us squeal is to make us yearn for what we can't have. It's sad to think that Neo has actually spent the vast majority of his life in bondage. He was Neo for less than a year before his quote-unquote death, and then he was dead for many years until he was successfully resurrected, only to reach middle age in the Matrix. Look at him and Trinity. They've gotten old, dudes. The Matrix has taken so much time away from them, it's won already. I just think this movie is just obliterating The Force Awakens in so many ways. One of the biggest problems I had with The Force Awakens when it came out, a problem which was never squashed by the rest of the sequel trilogy, is that the very existence of a sequel trilogy makes the sacrifice of Anakin Skywalker at the end of Episode 6 somewhat meaningless. It makes all the lives that were lost in the destruction of the second Death Star and the destruction of the Emperor somewhat meaningless. Because if the First Order can just spring up 30 years later or whatever, and it's just as powerful, and there's still essentially another Death Star but bigger, then what was the point of all of that? I loved that the second Neo was freed in this movie, he turned to Niobe and said, doesn't all of this, the fact that we're still fighting, the fact that I was trapped in the Matrix, the fact that there is still evil in the world, imply that everything we did was for nothing? And then we get the answer to that. No, of course it wasn't for nothing. Because the sacrifice that he made at the end of Revolutions, the sacrifice that Trinity made, brokered a new kind of peace in the Matrix world that was unheard of up until that point. I'm personally very happy that machines and humans are working together and that it's not just us and them anymore, because I think it's an appropriate way to push the story forward. I've actually been working on a video about all the times that the Terminator franchise has tried to reset the continuity and make a third Terminator film, and one of the problems that I was going to go into in that video is the fact that once you go past Terminator 2, I think you need to reinvent the relationship between the humans and the machines, because once you've established that the T-800 can learn human emotions and can feel love, then it invites the question that surely all of the other robots at Skynet can as well. And Terminator 2 is a perfect ending, and there is a tragedy to the fact that John Connor got the T-800 to love, but all of those robots will never get that chance. If you're going to make another Terminator movie, you need to push it forward. And I think the best way to do that is to say that now there are machines that have evolved enough to be on our side, and that it is no longer an us versus them. Now Terminator can't do that because the Matrix has already done it. So, sorry Terminator, I guess we're going to have to put up with another terrible third movie reboot in a couple of years. Hopefully that TV show is going to be good. It's a really satisfying payoff to go from like the Animatrix with the Second Renaissance and see the history of the Matrix world and see that it was not simply the robots that wanted to squash us. We were the aggressors. We incited violence just as much as they did, arguably in worse ways since we torched the sky. And to see all of that pay off so many years later in The Matrix Resurrections, where we've gotten to the point that humans and robots are working together, programs are allowed to interact with real beings in the real world, and they're growing fruit and they're accomplishing things that Zion could never dream of, I thought it was really sweet. And it immediately makes sure that the last three movies, no matter what happens now, no matter what happens going forward, it was not pointless, because Neo will forever be responsible for that peace. I wish that Anakin Skywalker could have gotten that treatment, even a fraction of that treatment, rather than just being ignored thoroughly for 3 movies. Anakin brings balance to the Force, and then in The Rise of Skywalker, the Jedi say to Rey that she needs to bring balance to the Force again. It's absolutely ludicrous. As The Matrix says, we are stuck in the same repeating loops. The same franchise expectations, the same endings, constantly dripping with references and callbacks, and the same scenes regurgitated, the same stories just with different faces. I love simultaneously that Lana Wachowski has said that this is a very personal movie and one that she felt she wanted to make after the death of her parents and a close friend. And you can feel that. You can feel that it is a personal tale that Lana wanted to make, and that now was the right time to do it after all these years. But then on the flip side, I think she's also aware of the fact that if she didn't make it on her own terms, eventually Warner Brothers was going to force it. And I feel like that line from Jonathan Groff where he says, like, you know, our overlords at Warner Brothers want us to make Matrix 4 and they're going to do it with or without us. I'm sure that conversation has been had probably several times with the Wachowskis. And I think if Lana hadn't have made Matrix 4, now, what with the current franchise climate, we would have gotten Matrix 4 in a couple of years, and it would have been by someone like J.J. Abrams. And yeah, maybe the action would have been better, but there's no guarantee. I think the only guarantee is that it would have been an uninspired retread. Okay, so I guess I've put it off for long enough. I've got to talk about the action in this movie, haven't I? The action in this movie really blows, and it's really sad to see it, because the first Matrix movie was such a pioneer of action, and it pushed action cinema to produce some really great stuff for several years afterwards. I don't think any of the fights in the Sam Raimi movies, even the ones without Bill Pope, would look anything like The Matrix if it wasn't for The Matrix. It's an action classic, it's a staple of action cinema, and it's kind of maddening that the latest Matrix movie doesn't have action on par with an MCU movie like Shang-Chi even. But then that's kind of the point, isn't it? Because Lana Wachowski is fully aware that the red pill narrative and the action and the violence in the original movie has sometimes been misconstrued and mishandled and misread by the audience. And that has led to some bad things happening in the world. And it almost feels like the movie can't give you the action that you crave, because then it's in danger of the point of the movie being clouded, just as it could have been and has been before.
Bullet time, bullet time.
And it's actually kind of clever in a way to edge you for 2.5 hours on the action that you expected, because it's a Matrix movie and it needs to fit those conventions, and then it doesn't give you that, and instead it gives you this meta commentary. Where I think this all falls down is the fact that there is still a copious amount of action throughout the entire movie. There's spectacle up the wazoo, there's quite a lot of fights, and not a single one of them is good. And I think if we get to that point where not a single one of the fights pops, where all of the cinematography is shot too close up, where all of the editing involves way too many cuts to see the moves that have been choreographed, I'd rather, honestly, this sounds crazy, but I'd rather The Matrix just left action behind altogether. It's clear Lana Wachowski wanted to make a sci-fi romance movie. It's clear that she's not as interested in action as she once was, or at the very least, Lily was maybe the one driving the action in the first place, and the fact that they're not on this together maybe means that we were going to get a different style. Because the only time I'm engaged with the movie is when someone's not throwing a punch. When no punches are being thrown, this movie is fantastic. It's engaging, it's emotional, it's clever, it's meta. Whenever there's a fight going on, I feel like I'm watching Jason Bourne. And for a Matrix movie, that is sacrilege. And it's such a shame because it really does hold us back. I feel like if the action was good, more people would be going to see it, and there'd be more of a chance that the message would get through. As much as good action in this movie would maybe seem counterintuitive to the point, it makes me sad to know that there's a chance this movie might bomb in the wake of No Way Home making $1 billion, when it is such a perfect and apt critique of that kind of movie making. And that's sad. I understand there's going to be loads of people that hated this movie and that felt disappointed and that they didn't get what they want. And trust me, when the action was cutting to other clips of action from the previous movies, that was a tough pill to swallow because it was just making it all the more clear what a step down the action in this movie is. I don't want to take away from the incredible work of DOP Daniela Massachesi. He stepped up when John Toll stepped down in the wake of COVID, and I think the movie does look beautiful. The light dictates the look of it more than the previous Matrix movies, but I like the style they've gone with. At times, it does look a bit like Cloud Atlas, but that's fine. It's literally a new Matrix, so I'm okay with it looking different. I think the only problem is, when it comes to the action, it looks like a modern movie rather than a classic Matrix movie. During a particularly bland fight against Party Smith says something like, "Oh, you know, you've missed a step, you're not as good as you used to be," and Neo's like, "It's true." And the fact that they're saying that whilst engaging in a terrible action scene is fun, but it doesn't quite excuse the fact that I am still watching a bland, boring action scene. The fact that the Mayor of Inji pops up and in an incredible cameo, begging, demanding a franchise spin-off, telling us that it's not as good as the good old days, whilst watching an action scene that is not as good as the good old days. The fact that that is so entertaining in and of itself, again, does not excuse the fact that all the punchy punch sucks. The Swarm are cool, but not as cool as having the agents. Having Neo do force pushes and having Neo and Trinity flying around together and clicking their fingers to remake the Matrix is cool, but it's not as cool as the fisticuffs we got in the first movie. Honestly, this movie would have been so much better served if Neo and Trinity had just stuck to the force pushes entirely. They're at that point now, they're elders in the Matrix, they're already established as insanely powerful. I don't think I needed Neo to throw a single punch in this movie to be satisfied. Let the younger characters do all the classic Matrix action. I've seen some complaints that the stakes are too low, but I think that any attempts to top the ending of Revolutions would end up like this.
It's another Death Star.
This was the Death Star. And this is Starkiller Base.
So it's big.
I think Lana not only understands that trying to top those movies would be a fool's errand, but that also the very fact of topping them would invalidate those movies. Starkiller Base makes the Death Star look like a toy, and that is insanely stupid. It is beyond parody that the best way to make the First Order more intimidating than the Empire is to make a Death Star that blows up multiple planets instead of just one. And on the point of spectacle, yeah, the spectacle in this movie sucks, but the spectacle in The Force Awakens ain't great either. None of those lightsaber duels are very good. So if I was going to pick between The Force Awakens and this movie, the fact that this movie actually has a story and a narrative that's surprising means that I would definitely watch this every single time over The Force Awakens. The Force Awakens has got none of the two, whereas The Matrix has at least got the story going for it. As much as it's clear Warner's gave Lana a lot of freedom with this sequel, I can't imagine they'd ever let her get away with no action whatsoever. And thus the result is The Matrix Resurrections has a whole lot of action that neither Lana nor the audience wants to engage with. Whenever there's action, particularly in the second act, it feels entirely superfluous. I actually think I'd enjoy the movie way more if you cut all those action scenes out, and I know that's crazy, but I'm okay with a new trilogy of Matrix movies moving into a different genre entirely. Make them more romantic if you want, make them more horror focused or more comedic if you want, but don't do the action if the action's going to be half-arsed. There's literally no point. The action in both this and Spider-Man No Way Home is really lacking Bill Pope. Dr. Octopus, Tugboat, Neo, Trinity, none of them look as good without his keen eye. This movie might be a miss in some aspects. Some people might hate it, some people might love it, but I'm just happy that it's created a dialogue, that people are pissed off, that some people are saying it's the greatest movie of the year. Like, we need more of that in online internet criticism, because it is getting to the stage, like with Spider-Man last week, where you're either in or you're out.
It's you who's out, Gobby. Out of your mind. Wrong answer!
The Matrix Resurrections is clearly Lana's movie. It's a response to her time making the original movies, the response the audience has had to the material for better and for worse. It's a movie that's a fully fledged sequel, a true Matrix 4, whilst being a deconstructionist remake of the first movie. It's funnier than the original movies without being too much. It strikes a newfound optimism for the Matrix world that makes sense considering the sacrifices our heroes made 60 years ago. It doesn't quite come together in some places, but damn, at least it's a movie that has something to say, a film that feels like it has a voice and some new ideas, a sequel that dares to add divisive elements to the canon the same way the first two sequels did. A big thank you to my full fat tier patrons, Dr. Cheekade and Craig Hurst. If you want to find me on Instagram, you can find me at full_fat_videos, and if you want to find me on Twitter, that's at fullfatvideos. Until next time, do something with milk, I guess.